Good evening, comrades, and welcome to the Online Communist Forum, where this week Jack Conrad will present the political report of the Provisional Central Committee of the Communist Party of Great Britain. This week, Jack will be mostly focusing on the ongoing genocide in Gaza, which is, as we know, aided and abetted by the United States and Great Britain. As usual, Jack will speak for about an hour, uh, after which you're very welcome to join in and click the raise hand button on your screen. And please accept being made into a panelist. That way you'll be able to speak. In the event that you don't want to be identified, please ask your questions in the chat below. Okay, Jack, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, I'm going to concentrate on Gaza. Um, I'm also, depending on time, talk about a couple of other things, but I'll definitely try to squeeze in just a few remarks on the forging communist unity process. Well, let's begin with Gaza. We've got obviously some ghastly news, not surprising. If you withhold food, eventually, not only some, but the entire population of Gaza faces a real threat of starvation. And although we've, seen reports of various lorries going in, they are far from adequate. So I think the figure that I came across was something like 77 lorries going in. Not all of them end up at their destination point. Some get blockaded and looted. Some are held back at Israeli checkpoints. But the actual need is way beyond that. So again, just for what it's worth, I came across again another figure of what's needed on a daily basis. It's something like 500 lorries. So it's clear that the Israeli authorities are holding back food supplies. They've been doing that for months, and even with setting up this new system, they know it. It's far from adequate. It's enough, on the other hand, to provide bait at the end of your line. So we shouldn't see, the lorries going in as an example of Israel relenting to world public opinion. That there you are, you've got Donald Trump talking about starvation and this not being good. David Lammy shedding crocodile tears, in Britain, and I applaud it. Artists and writers producing a joint letter, denouncing genocide. Report after report from UN authorities and various other bodies talking about, what is in the immediate prospect in terms of people dying in Gaza. To me, what is going on, I'm afraid, is all too clear. And all you need to do is look at this replacement for UNRWA, the United Nations relief agency in Gaza, and look at the new US-Israeli sponsored Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And what we have is the replacement of the UN and their 40 distribution points with this GHF and its 4 distribution points. And to get an idea of what I'm talking about in terms of bait, what you need to do is look at a map. Look at a map of Gaza. Where are these distribution points of this new institution, this foundation. Where are they located? Well, there's 4 of them. Not all of them are open. And what you have is one to the south of Gaza City, one in the center of Gaza, and 2 in the south. In other words, what is going on is the delivery, woefully inadequate delivery, to where the majority of the Gazan population aren't, and where the Israeli authorities want to displace them to. So in other words, if you live in Gaza City, you're meant to go to the south of Gaza City in order to get fed. We know the supplies are inadequate. What happens to the old? What happens to the infirm? To hell with them, but sufficient, this is presumably the calculation, sufficient people go there, wait in a queue for hours in the sun, in the baking sun, in the hope that they will get some food to feed themselves and their families. Well, again, predictably, surely, what we've seen is examples of these supply stations being turned into chaos. Hardly surprising, because what we're dealing with is a starving population. And what we see is the complete lack of, the complete breakdown of order, the complete breakdown of human solidarity, and everyone out for themselves. That's what you would expect when people are, starving. Do you expect people really to stand for 3 hours and then orderly, one after the other? What happens if you're at the back? What do you do? Presumably you try to get through the wire fence. Presumably you try to get your hands on supplies in order to keep yourself, maybe your family, alive. How do the Israelis respond to this? We've had reports of them shooting in the air. Well, yeah, sure, killing dozens in the process. So you fire in the air. I'm not saying it's technically impossible to kill someone by shooting in the air, but no, they're shooting at people. So you not only go to these distribution points in order to feed yourself, maybe feed your family, you also go there and you risk your life. That Israeli troops will shoot at you. And we also have reports of Israeli aircraft, unleashing missiles near people, queuing and killing more people. So you could regard this as an example of Israeli inefficiency and Israeli bungling. You could regard it as this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has got no experience in terms of distributing aid, no experience of feeding starving people, and I'm sure that's true. But the Israeli authorities, the IDF, the Israeli bureaucracy, the Israeli cabinet, they know that perfectly well. So I don't think it's got anything to do with bad planning. I think it's got everything to do with preparing the Gazan population so that they are so desperate. Not only do they pack down towards the south, they become so desperate that when Israel, and this is my guess because I don't know, but when they become so desperate and Israel opens up the southern border to Sinai, and one hopes that Egyptian troops don't do what they've been ordered to do and shoot people will be desperate. People will flood into the Sinai, and then Israel closes the border. That's the only way I can make sense of what's going on. It doesn't make sense to me in any other way. We know Netanyahu's excuse. There's been negotiations going on between Israel and Hamas. And Netanyahu comes out and says, well, we're going to continue our offensive until we defeat Hamas. Well, again, this is a nonsense, and he knows it, you know it, I know it. Why? Because we're not dealing with an isolated, small group. What do they used to call the IRA? A small group of isolated terrorists. What we're dealing with, yes, is a body of armed men. Hamas has its armed wing. There's no doubt about that. They continue to fight. They continue to organize to the extent that they can, in the horror that is Gaza. But also, Hamas is a political movement, which means that, hospitals, your health service, anything that resembles a state machine to distribute supplies, to keep order, that's Hamas. That's not a military organization. It's a civilian organization. Remember, Hamas has not only, of course, got support in Gaza. It was elected last time there was anything remotely like free elections, but it's also got a mass base on the West Bank, and I would guess in refugee camps. And of course, the other excuse, and it is an excuse put out by Netanyahu and the Israeli cabinet, is they want to get the war captives back. Well, how on earth starving people gets your war captives back? How on earth bombing people gets your war captives back is beyond me, because that was not the aim. It's never been the aim. The actual aim is clear, and that is to clear the population out, clear the population, the Palestinian population out of Gaza. Now, we didn't predict, I don't think anyone predicted that it would, first of all, when it came to the next stage of the Zionist project, that it would be Gaza. The general prediction would have been it was going to be the West Bank. There were moves to extend Israeli annexations in the West Bank. There's been a continual colonization process on the West Bank. Not only has East Jerusalem been annexed, but we've got something like 500,000 Israeli Jewish settlers on the West Bank. And I'm going to use the right term. I've been scolded for calling Gaza the world's largest open prison. I don't mean to, when I say that it's a soft option. I'll call it an open prison in terms of the air. This is a hellhole. This is not a soft option. And of course, what we've seen, since the Fatah Hamas split, is Gaza subject to siege conditions, and of course, over the last 2 months, to starvation conditions. And what I would add, therefore, is that yes, Gaza, in that sense, was accident that it went first. That was caused clearly by October the 7th. That's where the operation was staged from. But clearly, when we look at this, this cabinet under Netanyahu, what happens first in Gaza, we can guarantee that the West Bank and Israel itself will follow, i.e., there will be moves to at the very least reduce the percentage of the Arab population in Israel. I call it Israel proper. But we can also predict that there will be moves by the state itself in an overt way, not only in Gaza, but on the West Bank, i.e., pushing the Gazan population into Sinai, i.e., pushing the West Bank Palestinian population over the other side of the Jordan into the kingdom of of Jordan. So at least as things stand, as far as I know, and I haven't checked up the news since this morning, there's no agreement in terms of a ceasefire. What my understanding is that Hamas has said, well, we'll trade war prisoners, Palestinians for Israelis. But what we want at the end of the day is a commitment to a permanent ceasefire. And that, as I said, is something, as my understanding is, that Netanyahu and the Israeli cabinet have rejected. Okay, I think it's worthwhile repeating it. And that is, although I've been sort of talking about Netanyahu and the coalition government, we should recognize that this ethnic cleansing, this drive towards genocide, isn't something unique to Likud and those parties to the right. It's something that's common to Zionism. This is a Zionist project, and we shouldn't forget that Israel begins under the domination of Labour Zionism, and that it oversaw not only the declaration of independence of Israel, but the ethnic cleansing of 750,000 Palestinians. It was Labour Zionism that was the government in 1967 when they defeated Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, and took over Jerusalem, the whole of Jerusalem, conquered the West Bank, conquered the Golan Heights, and yes, conquered Gaza. They gave up, of course, their initial plans for colonization of Gaza and put that business off. Nevertheless, we saw the annexation of the Golan Heights, the ceding of the Golan Heights with colonists, and I've already mentioned the West Bank. So we shouldn't think that this is just right-wing Zionism. This is Zionism going back to Theodor Herzl, the Jewish state. This is going back 1947, 1948. It isn't just about now. Now is the culmination, I would argue, of what Theodor Herzl planned back in the 19th century, that Britain sponsored with the Balfour Declaration. Just wanted to comment on various pro-Palestinian left-wing sites. I think the sort of discourse on some of these forums is very confused. My own sad assessment, my own fear is, as I've said, I think that 2 million people face the real prospect of starvation and death, or being cleared out if they can walk, if they can be carried over the border. As I said, I can't look at things in a different way. I cannot make sense of things in any other way. But you can read on left-wing sites, pro-Palestinian sites, that the Palestinians are undefeatable. I'm afraid that's just not true. I think the Palestinians do face the danger of being defeated, at least in terms of mandate Palestine. I do think that they are going to be forced off that land, and I do think they're going to be ethnically cleansed. So I read, for example, again, I just went, this is bizarre. I read one site, and it's not just one, but I did read one site that looked, for example, at this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and its first attempt to distribute food and the chaos that resulted, and celebrated that, celebrated people's desperation, and talked about the Palestinians being a flood and being uncontrollable. I just don't think some people have got a grasp at really what's going on this isn't something to celebrate. This is because people are so desperate. Normal human solidarity, normal human behavior breaks down. To me, that would be the equivalent of celebrating cannibalism. This isn't anything to celebrate. This isn't anything that, is a bit, well, there's the Palestinian people. This is an example of resistance. This isn't an example of resistance. It's an example of desperation that's been forced upon them, I think, by a cynical and calculating Israeli government. And you have to say, as Ian did in terms of his introduction, that the UK and the United States are complicit in this. I've mentioned the Balfour Declaration. I mean, the idea was to get a little Jewish Ulster for Britain in the Middle East. This is after they've carved up the Ottoman Empire between Britain and France. It was going to be along with the Tsarist empire as well. That was going to be in on the act, but of course the Bolsheviks rather upset that particular plan. They were going to get Constantinople and access to the warm waters of the Mediterranean. That was going to be their share of the booty. But Britain and France divided up the Middle East, and what the British were calculating on is a loyal bit of the Middle East, because you couldn't trust the Arabs. These people would rise up against you. They had to be held down. But on the other hand, a Jewish colony that relied on an imperial sponsor, the calculation was you could rely on these people. It didn't turn out quite like that. We know that because Britain had to make a calculation between Arab revolt on one side and keeping the Jewish colonists happy on the other, and found that particular act extremely hard, and eventually bailed out. I think France was then the imperial sponsor, but the imperial sponsor was soon in the 1970s. It was the United States. And it's the United States that is now the imperial sponsor. So when you hear Donald Trump talking about starving people, yes, he knows that there are starving people, and presumably he's playing to some audience back home. But we should be quite clear what is going on as far as the United States. The United States knows what's going on, knows what Israel is doing. To repeat the point, this is not, an ethnic cleansing of Gaza is not an American or a Trumpite land grab. This is an American approval for Israel to go in for a land grab. This is giving the green light for ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. That's what's going on. And of course, the United States supports Israel diplomatically, supports Israel financially, and above all, supports Israel militarily. And that brings me to Britain. Quite rightly, we have voices raised in Parliament on demonstrations, demanding that Britain, impose at the very least an arms embargo on Israel. Lammy boasts about how many licenses have been cancelled. The problem is for Lammy is he also has to walk a tightrope, and he has to walk a tightrope between public opinion in Britain that just looks at what is going on in Gaza with absolute horror, that this is inhumane. This is, this is murder, but slowly. That's what's going on in Gaza. British people can see that. But what we have is weasel words from Lammy, token actions. The fact of the matter is that he can't do anything else. It's possible to imagine Lammy imposing a total arms embargo, but it is very hard to imagine. Why? Because the United Kingdom is locked in is subordinate to the United States. And you can illustrate that by looking at an arms embargo, of course, that Lamy isn't going to impose, at least not anytime soon, in spite of what's going on in Gaza. And that is Israel's front rank, most sophisticated fighter bomber aircraft, the F-35. This is a fifth generation fighter bomber. It can do everything. It's ghastly in terms of the amount of money these things cost. It can do, as I say, everything. It's a stealth plane, so it can't be detected, by radar. Not that the Palestinians are equipped with radar and anti-aircraft technology that could shoot one of these things down, but it's also got vertical takeoff and landing. It can do everything, but they come in at 80 million or 100 million dollars each. And of course, in terms of Britain, when it was talking about a fifth generation aircraft, it would look around Europe, Germany, France, Italy, maybe as a partner, but instead it went with the United States. And for its agreement to purchase these aircraft, what it got was 15% of British manufacture. Now that includes, I think, a bit of the end bit. I won't give it a more technical term than that. The end bit of the F-35. It includes the ejector seat. It includes various electronics, and it also includes some bits of the swivel. I'm not going to give it a more technical term than that. That's what enables this aircraft to take off vertically, right? The idea of David Lammy turning around and saying, well, I'm only guessing that we're going to cut export off of these things. Well, one, you've got how much of it goes directly to the United States for assemble. But it's not just that, of course, is it? That if you take for every hour an F-35 flies, it will take, I'm just making this one up, it will take something like 10 hours, 15 hours, 20 hours of maintenance. And it's not that the back end of the plane will need replacing, but certainly the swivel bit of it will need replacing. And that will go, I'm guessing, directly to Israel. Might go via Cyprus, I don't know. But nonetheless, that will have on it to Israel. But Lammy will not cut that off. Why? Because I presume it's in the contract. And if it isn't in the contract, this would be to risk a rift with the United States. So we need to understand that while it's a correct demand, we're not expecting Lammy to do it. It's not that it's impossible, but we shouldn't imagine that ending arms to Israel is just about Israel. We need to understand Israel as an American colonial settler project. We need to understand that Israel's war machine is to a very considerable degree an extension of the American war machine. So are we really expecting David Lammy to sanction the United States war machine? That's what we need to understand about where we're at the moment. We should demand it, but we should recognize what we are demanding. Okay, so this really brings me to the campaign by the PCS, the Palestine Solidarity campaign, and what they're saying, and clearly they're under pressure. I mean, I haven't seen it in recent demonstrations, but I think, I don't know, maybe Ian will know, maybe other comrades on this forum will know how many national Palestine demonstrations there have been. I know there was one in Liverpool, the rest have been in London, but I think it's something like 25, 26 demonstrations in London. And I can remember in the early demonstrations, and I'm talking about within the first year, various people going around with homemade signs of saying that we've been demonstrating. I remember these demonstrations have all been mass. Even the small ones have been huge. The huge ones have been truly, truly huge. But going around with placards saying that we've been demonstrating, nothing's happened. We need to do more than demonstrate. I agree with that. You could argue, and again, I'm not decrying demonstrations, by the way. I'm quite the opposite. I'm all in favor of demonstration. It shows you, it's like the iceberg of public opinion. If you get 100,000 people out, that says something about public opinion. If you get 900,000 people out, that says something about public opinion. But people are demanding more, and that's right. And okay, when it comes to politics, what are they demanding? Have they got any hope with Lammy? Have they got any hope with Keir Starmer? No, they're realistic enough to know that that's not likely to happen. So, okay, we've seen Jeremy Corbyn re-elected, but re-elected not least because of his stance on Palestine. We've seen other independents elected on a Palestine platform. That's good, but that's clearly not enough. We've also seen them being, no surprise, ineffective in Parliament. What can 6 or whatever the number happens to be of MPs do in Parliament? Very little. But okay, so then you've got the temptation, and again, it's not something I would oppose, but you've got the temptation of direct action, and we've seen heroic direct action ever since October the 7th, and of course before. And we've seen comrades break through, fencing, break, through barbed wire. We've seen them clamber up buildings. We've seen them break into buildings. We've seen them occupy buildings. And clearly, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign is under pressure from we need to do something, and we need to do something now. And so what we've got is the Palestine Solidarity Campaign agreeing to support mass pickets of various arms factories. So Sheffield, I think it's Rochester, Havant, they're only a few. And I would urge comrades, not because I think they're marvelous articles, but at least they're thinking articles. And I'm talking about the latest issues of Socialist Worker, not a newspaper I would normally recommend comrades reading. And they've got some at least thoughtful comments on this, both in terms of previous weeks, in terms of the What We Think column, the editorial column, but also this week, for example, there's a thoughtful piece talking about how the Socialist Workers' Party will back these pickets, but you can see the dilemma for the SWP, and it's a genuine dilemma. On the one side, you've got their wish to join with the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, who's under pressure from its own membership, its own support base. But you see the SWP also then going, cripes, this will bring us into conflict potentially, and I think it will, with the GMB, with Unite. Now, I've not seen the General Secretary of the GMB and don't expect to see the General Secretary of the GMB or the General Secretary of Unite on one of these national Palestine demonstrations anytime soon, but I could be wrong. What I do know, and what Socialist Worker notes, of course, when it comes to Trident, for example, we have the GMB fully in support of Trident renewal, and Trident can kill far more than 2 million people if it let off its full complement of multiple warheaded missiles on Russian or Chinese cities. The GMB supports that because it's good for jobs, isn't it? And Unite takes a similar position, not quite as bellicose as the GMB, but it's of a similar sod the bigger picture. Let's look after our members and their wages and their jobs, that sort of approach. But also what Socialist Worker warns against, and again, it's a genuine dilemma. I mean, quite frankly, I don't think we should worry about upsetting the trade union bureaucracy. I'm not saying that at all. I think we should aim to upset the trade union bureaucracy. We should aim to overthrow the trade union bureaucracy. But what about workers? What about ordinary workers? And again, Socialist Worker has, I presume, a new recruit or a recent recruit, but someone who used to work in one of these factories and says, well, in my area, employment opportunities are few and far between. Most industry is closed down. Most workers in these arms factories sort of know what they're doing, but don't want to know. Why? Because as well as supplying Israel with swivel bits, these swivel bits also, of course, go to the RAF, also go to the Royal Navy, also go to the American Marine Corps, also go to the American Air Force, also go to, I don't know how many dozen now, different air forces. So the particular swizzle bit or the particular ejection seat that you happen to be collaborating in producing, it's not going to have stamped on it for delivery to Israel. But nonetheless, at least according to this comrade being interviewed as part of this article in Socialist Worker, they're conscious of it. Okay, so what do we do? Do we actually say that the answer lies with these workers? That if you go on strike, if you refuse to make these swivel bits, if you refuse to make the ejector seat, this will save Palestinians. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think Socialist Worker think it's going to work either. So what's the answer? The comrades talk about in the past how, for example, in Unite, and I presume going back further, you could look at the AEU, Amalgamated Engineering Union, and other such unions, how there were motions put, maybe sometimes passed, for alternative lines of employment. Yeah, sure. Okay. That's possible. Unlikely, but it's possible. But no, what the comrades then do is give the example of when munition workers went on strike in Germany in World War I. And I'm going with that. Is British capitalism just about to face a constitutional crisis? Is the constitution just about to collapse? Where's our armed workers' militia? How many regiments have we brought over from the army? How many battleships have been won to put up the red flag? But what I would say, in terms of at least, as a thought suggestion, nothing more, that maybe in terms of a more appropriate, more productive target, in terms of direct action. I don't reject direct action, by the way. We shouldn't reject any tactic. But one that might have more leverage is actually looking at airports, might be looking at seaports, but above all airports. Heathrow, for example. Heathrow will be well organized in terms of the trade union movement. Heathrow workers, especially when it comes to people loading cargo planes, a lot of them will be from the Middle East. A lot of them will be migrants. A lot of them will be open to a message that you should refuse to handle goods that are designed for the Israeli war machine. That's possible. That's possible because of the strength of trade unionism in airports, one of the few remaining, how should I put it, hubs of strong trade unionism. That's a suggestion. Either way, we should certainly not get into the politics of blaming individual workers in the many relatively small workplaces that are responsible for supplying bits and pieces of the Israeli war machine in a situation that in order not to handle Israeli stuff that's going to end up in Israel, you basically have to go on strike, full stop. because how do you differentiate what goes? I've made the argument: what goes to the United States, what goes to the RAF, what goes to at least a dozen other air forces. You could say they should be just on strike and refuse to make arms. I think that would be a utopian nonsense. Socialist Worker itself notes that amongst the most militant sections of the German working class, in the revolution, no surprise, were munitions workers. You can make the same argument in Britain, about engineering workers. Either way, we should avoid sort of trying to guilt trip people. We should certainly not advocate, elitist actions. That doesn't mean that if people are arrested, you don't argue that juries should free them. You don't argue to condemn them. Quite the opposite. You recognize the self-sacrifice. You recognize, what's motivating these comrades, and it's entirely admirable and it's entirely understandable. Why? Because the task in front of us to actually do anything real appears to be so huge, and the answer has to begin, I'm afraid, the real answer that we've got to offer is the question of party, is the question of program. And I just note that, for example, if we take a campaign, Stop the War Coalition, it can make a huge contribution here if, for example, it raised the slogan of a popular militia rather than stop this war or that war. If it fought for a programmatic alternative, that would be something. But the key question is party, and it's then what sort of a party. What we need is a communist party. That was what the German working class realized, in 1918, 1919. It's what the Russian working class realized. That's what we need if we're going to end the system that produces war, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. Okay, so that's taken me in nearly 3/4 of an hour. So I'm going to put aside Elon Musk, other than to say that what he's achieved so far in terms of cost savings have been marginal. Its performance, I note the stories about him being high on drugs. That wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. But the point I really wanted to make about Elon Musk, it was not Elon Musk in charge. It's been Trump in charge, not because it's Trump, but because it's the American state. It's not the billionaires like Musk who've captured the American state. The American state is necessary to capital accumulation. I mean, I'll just give you what the American budget is. Remember, Elon Musk was there to save $2 trillion. He was never going to do that. Pensions, vets, defense, interest rates was always going to take care of that. But the American budget annually is $6.75 trillion, right? What does Elon Musk save? Purportedly 175 million. The reality is that such is the chaos in America that interest payments mean actually total spend in America has gone up. There's never going to be a retreat from the big state in America. I was going to comment on Iran, was going to comment on Gerry Adams, but I'm going to finish, as I said I would, on the latest developments in the forging communist unity. And we've received a letter. I presume it will be on the website of the comrades in TASS talking about socialism, of where they tell us that they're suspending talks for a short period. The talks will resume. We will still have a communist university, and I haven't seen the full timetable, but I know there are plenty of debates and sessions involving all three organizations, as well as comrades not in any of our three organizations. But what they say is that, look, we've been in these discussions and we've criticized the CPGB draft program, and we've been challenged by the CPGB comrades, well, what about your program, sort of idea, and we've decided to go away and draft our own draft program. Now, I wrote about that as a possibility in the last article on Forging Communist Unity that I wrote, and I made the point there that in terms of the CPGB, we've taken program as central. That's really what we are. You know, we don't boast about our mass, mass base, our deep roots in the working class. You know, how many hundreds of members we've got, or something like that. If we've got anything to boast about, it's our program and how we take program seriously. So, you know, if you look back at our organization, which had its origins way back in the early 1980s, I think one of the first articles I wrote in what was then the Leninist was called Which Road, which ended up as a book in 1991 that provided at least some of the raw material that went towards our ability to produce a draft program. And all I can say is that because we've taken program seriously, we designed the program not as the the confession of faith of a few dozen comrades. The draft program is called the Draft Program of the Communist Party of Great Britain because it was designed to programmatically equip a mass communist party in Great Britain. It wasn't designed for a small group. It was designed to be a program for a genuine party. And we've really taken the approach that what we would do in any process of splits and fusions, crucially fusions, is that this would be our contribution to such a process. And that's remained. So I have to say, I find it somewhat puzzling when the comrades in TASS talk about us presenting an ultimatum. We haven't presented an ultimatum. What we've said is what we've always said, is that, of course, the draft program is open to amendment, a refoundation Congress, or call it whatever you will, is perfectly free to reject it, amend it as it sees fit. But this is our contribution to it. Now, we don't demand off the comrades in TASS or Promethean that they take it or leave it. They could have come along and said, well, this is the amendment we would put forward to it, and we'll debate that out at a conference. But no, we haven't put it forward in that spirit at all. We are quite prepared, and we've made the argument, and we've told the comrades that if we find ourselves in a minority, so be it. We've been in a minority before. We expect to be in a minority in the future. We don't fetishize. We don't fetishize being in a majority. That's just nonsense. So what we say is, if we find ourselves in a minority, depending on what the issues are, we're quite prepared to accept our minority status as long as we've got the ability to struggle to become a majority. And we might take the option under those circumstances of being an open, publicly open faction of such an organization, a publicly declared faction around our draft program. On the other hand, it's also the possibility, isn't it, that when we have a fusion, a Congress, I'm using the words advisedly, a fusion Congress, that the other comrades, such as Comrade Nick Rack and Ed Potts, might find themselves in a minority. Okay, it's not the end of the world. But what they've decided to do is to get those two comrades, Comrades Nick and Comrade Ed, to go away and draft a program. I think they think it will take them a couple of weeks, maybe a month, I must admit I'm full of admiration of their speed on this one. I don't know then what the process they're going to go through, and I'm posing this again in the way that I did in my last article. Does it then go to the comrades in TAS for amendment, or are the comrades going to be presented, and this has history behind it, and that's why I bring it up, are they going to be presented with a take it or leave it? And the reason I'm saying that is last time we were in talks with Comrade Nick Rack was around something way back in Left Unity, if anyone remembers Left Unity, or maybe some comrades haven't even heard of Left Unity, but we were involved with something called the Socialist Platform. And at the founding conference of the Socialist Platform, we went with 20 amendments to the programmatic statement. I don't think you can call it a programmatic statement that had been drawn up by Comrade Nick Rack. And he won the vote at the first conference that no votes would be binding, that all the votes at this first conference would be indicative. Now, I was, I don't think I'm giving anything away here. I was in the position of saying, for God's sake, this is ridiculous. I made the speech. We lost the vote. We lost it narrowly. And it was my own comrades that persuaded me that we should stay, we should make the argument. And if we were going to split, we should do it afterwards rather than before. Okay, so we lost the vote, that votes would be meaningful. And then we went on, and I think we won every single vote bar one. But so what? It didn't mean anything. So we won every single one of our amendments. But as it was just indicative, it didn't matter. And we went away and we established the Communist Platform that went on to win or secure, call it whatever you will, 4 seats on the national leadership of Left Unity. So that matters. Why? Because I know in this organization, when it's come to our draft program, that our draft program has been immeasurably strengthened by the fact that we have it open, and we've had it open for amendment on a whole series of different occasions. Some of the amendments have been accepted, but all of the amendments have proved stimulating, have produced clarity, about our differences, but have strengthened the program. So again, I raise this because, I fear that perhaps the comrades might be tempted, in order to push things through, because maybe there's an element of impatience, might be tempted to ignore the debate inside TAS. And certainly if it came to a refoundation Congress or foundation Congress, again, call it whatever you will, I would be mortified if we had another rerun of that, that we were presented with a take it or leave it. Every vote is just indicative. It doesn't, if you accept it, you accept it. But that isn't the way to proceed. That's not going to produce you a worthwhile program. It's not going to produce you worthwhile unity either. Okay, so on one level, of course, we welcome what's going on with the comrades. We wait and see what they produce, because we think we know what the differences are, but sometimes it's very hard to tell. We think there are differences. Well, in fact, we know, but exactly what? We think there are differences over the question of the transition period. Is there a transition period? How long is it? Well, I've made the argument as long as necessary. Depends on the world revolution. But also it depends on class struggle, not only against the capitalist class in Britain and internationally, but the class struggle against the petty bourgeoisie, which we use different methods compared with, monopoly capital, against the bourgeois state. We've also got other differences, I'm sure, that are less important than that. We wait and see. So we have to see what the comrades produce. All I would say, though, is that they are presenting us, and they have presented us with an ultimatum, and this is what we are rejecting. And that is, they've accused us of having an uncollaborative view. In other words, they've presented us with the ultimatum: you've got to abandon your program, and that's called a collaborate. We're not going to abandon our program. We're going to stick to our program. We're open for it to be amended. Of course we are. But you don't adopt a program, over year after year after year to casually cast it aside. If you take program seriously, and I do think that Marxists do take program seriously. They don't fetishize program. They don't make it the be all and end all. But the program, to me at least, is central to a party. And program, I think, is something that very much matters in the early stages, because it determines what the sort of organization you're fighting for is going to be. And I think I will finish there, Ian. And so we've just under an hour. So that's hit the target right on the nail. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Comrades, anyone who wishes to make a point or ask a question, please use the raise hand button. And I'll come to Anne McShane first, but just before I do that, I just wanted to point out a couple of little things that I looked up whilst you were talking. The West Bank population, the Palestinian population, is 3.2 million. The Gaza population is around 2.1, 2.2 million, depending on who you look at and how many people have been killed. The Israeli settler population on the West Bank is around 500 to 700,000. Much of the violence which has been increasing in the West Bank has been